Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most catastrophic events in human history, the Black Death. Imagine a world where in just a few short years, up to half the population vanishes. It's a scenario straight out of a horror movie. But for the people of the 14th century, it was a terrifying reality. This isn't just a story of death and despair, it's also a story of immense change, of how societies were torn down and rebuilt from the ashes. So, how did this pandemic start? How did it spread so fast and kill so many? And what were its lasting effects on the world we live in today? Join me as we journey back to the Middle Ages to uncover the chilling story of the Great Pestilence. Our story begins not in Europe, but thousands of miles away, on the arid plains of Central Asia. In the early 1330s, something shifted. The climate was changing, becoming cooler and wetter. This forced local rodent populations, like marmots, which were natural reservoirs for a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, to move out of their usual habitats and into areas closer to human settlements. This bacterium is the culprit behind the plague. It's carried by fleas, which live on rodents. When a flea bites an infected rodent, it ingests the bacteria. The bacteria then multiply inside the flea, blocking its digestive tract. Starving and desperate, the flea will then bite any warm-blooded animal it can find, including humans, regurgitating the bacteria into the new host's bloodstream. For a long time, this was a localized problem. But the 14th century was an age of connection, largely thanks to the Mongol Empire. The Mongols had created a vast, unified territory that stretched across Asia, and with it came the legendary Silk Road. This network of trade routes was the superhighway of the medieval world, carrying silks, spices, and unfortunately, disease. As traders and armies moved along these routes, they unknowingly carried infected rodents and fleas with them. By the 1340s, the plague had reached the Black Sea, arriving at the bustling Genoese trading port of Kaffa in modern-day Crimea. And it's here that one of history's most infamous tales of biological warfare allegedly took place. In 1346, the Mongol army, led by Jani Beg, was besieging Kaffa. As the siege dragged on, a mysterious illness swept through the Mongol ranks, killing thousands of soldiers. In a desperate and macabre act, Jani Beg is said to have ordered his men to use catapults to launch the plague-ridden corpses of their dead soldiers over the city walls. The horrified Genoese traders inside were suddenly trapped in a city filled with disease. The stench of death was everywhere. As panic set in, some of the traders managed to escape by sea, fleeing back towards Italy. But they weren't just escaping the siege, they were carrying the plague with them. In their ships' holds, hidden among the cargo, were infected rats and fleas. These death ships were about to unleash a pandemic on an unsuspecting Europe. In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys pulled into the Sicilian port of Messina. The people of Messina who gathered at the docks were met with a horrifying sight. Most of the sailors aboard were either dead or gravely ill, covered in strange black boils that oozed blood and pus. The Sicilian authorities quickly ordered the fleet to leave, but it was too late. The plague was already ashore. From Messina, it spread like wildfire across Sicily. Panicked people fleeing the disease only helped to carry it further. Within months, it had reached the Italian mainland, striking major port cities like Genoa and Venice. From Italy, the Black Death began its relentless march across the continent. It traveled along the well-established trade routes both by sea and by land. By 1348, it had engulfed France, Spain, and England. It reached Germany and Scandinavia by 1349, and finally moved into Eastern Europe and Russia by 1351. No corner of the continent was safe. So what was it like to live through this? The disease came in 3 forms. The most common was bubonic plague, which caused the terrifying buboes, swollen lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, or neck. These could grow to the size of an apple, and would often turn black, which is how the Black Death got its name. Sufferers also experienced high fever, chills, and vomiting of blood. Bubonic plague was brutal, with a mortality rate of 30 to 75%, and death usually came within a week. Then there was pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs. This form was even more terrifying because it could be spread directly from person to person through airborne droplets from coughing. It was almost always fatal, with death occurring in just 1 or 2 days. Finally, there was septicemic plague, where the bacteria entered the bloodstream directly. This was the rarest and most deadly form, with a mortality rate of virtually 100%. People could literally go to bed feeling healthy and be dead by morning. Imagine the sheer terror. Your friends, your family, your neighbors are dying all around you. No one understood what was causing it. At the time, medical knowledge was based on the ancient Greek theory of the 4 humors. Doctors believed the disease was caused by an imbalance in the body or by miasma, bad air corrupted by the alignment of planets, earthquakes, or foul smells. They had no concept of germs or bacteria. Treatments were ineffective and often horrifying. Doctors, wearing their famous beaked masks stuffed with herbs to ward off the miasma, would try lancing the buboes to drain them or practice bloodletting, which only weakened the patient further. People tried all sorts of folk remedies, from drinking potions made of ground-up emeralds to sitting in sewers, hoping one bad smell would drive out another. Nothing worked. The social fabric completely unraveled. Fear and paranoia were rampant. Chroniclers of the time, like Giovanni Boccaccio in his Decameron, described how brother was forsaken by brother, nephew by uncle, sister by brother, and oftentimes husband by wife. Even worse, he wrote, fathers and mothers refused to nurse and assist their own children. People abandoned their homes and families, hoping to outrun the disease. Fields were left unplowed, and livestock roamed free. The sheer number of dead was overwhelming. Mass graves were dug, but they quickly filled up. In cities like Florence and London, bodies were simply piled up in the streets. Priests and gravediggers died in such large numbers that there was often no one left to perform last rites or bury the dead, a matter of extreme importance in the deeply religious society of the Middle Ages. This widespread, inexplicable death led many to believe it was a divine punishment from God for humanity's sins. This sparked movements of extreme religious fervor. The Flagellants were one such group. They traveled from town to town, whipping themselves with leather straps tipped with iron spikes as a public display of penance, hoping to appease God's wrath. While they were initially welcomed, they were soon seen as troublemakers who only helped spread the plague further. In the search for a scapegoat, suspicion tragically fell upon Jewish communities. They were falsely accused of causing the plague by poisoning wells. This led to horrific persecutions and massacres across Europe, particularly in the Rhineland. Thousands of innocent people were tortured and burned alive, despite Pope Clement VI issuing orders to protect them, stating that they too were dying from the plague. The first wave of the Black Death burned itself out by around 1351, but it didn't disappear. It would return in smaller, but still devastating, outbreaks every few years for centuries. By the time it was over, the demographic impact was staggering. It's estimated that the Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people, wiping out 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Some areas were hit harder than others. Certain villages were completely wiped off the map. It took Europe over 200 years for its population to recover to pre-plague levels. But this immense loss of life, as tragic as it was, also set the stage for profound social and economic change. This is one of history's great ironies. Before the plague, Europe was operating under the feudal system. A vast population of peasants or serfs were tied to the land and worked for lords in exchange for protection. There was a surplus of labor, which meant wages were low, and social mobility was virtually non-existent. The Black Death completely upended this system. With so many workers dead, there was a sudden and severe labor shortage. For the first time, peasants were in a position of power. They could demand higher wages, better working conditions, and more freedom. When lords tried to resist these demands and freeze wages, it led to widespread anger and, in some cases, open rebellion, like the famous Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381. Although these revolts were often suppressed, they signaled the beginning of the end for serfdom. Many peasants were able to buy their freedom, or simply left their manors to find better work in the cities. The old feudal order was crumbling, This period also saw a shift in cultural and religious attitudes. The Church's inability to explain the plague, or offer any real comfort or protection, led many to question its authority. While some became more pious, others grew more secular, focusing on enjoying life on earth rather than preparing for the afterlife. This can be seen in the art of the period, which became more preoccupied with themes of death and mortality, a style known as the Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death. The immense trauma of the plague shook people's faith in old institutions and traditions, paving the way for new ideas. Some historians argue that this questioning of authority and the focus on human experience helped lay the groundwork for the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the rise of modern medicine. It forced people to look for rational, scientific explanations for the world around them, rather than purely religious ones. The Black Death was, without a doubt, a horrific chapter in our history. It was a time of unimaginable suffering, fear, and loss. But it's also a powerful reminder of human resilience. Out of the ashes of this catastrophe, a new Europe began to emerge. It accelerated changes that broke down the rigid structures of the medieval world and set society on a new path, a path that would eventually lead to the modern age. It's a stark lesson in how pandemics can reshape our world in ways we can't even predict. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like to explore next. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.